The ground beneath his boots was not shaking. It was vibrating. A deep mechanical pulse moved through the black soil of the Ukrainian steppe, through the wooden wheels and steel legs of his ZIS field gun. And into his body, the earth itself seemed to be warning him. Something enormous was approaching. The air smelled of smoke, burned metal, and fresh dirt torn apart by artillery. Somewhere beyond the golden wheat fields west of Kiev, 54 tons of German steel were moving forward. A Panther tank. Beside Serenko, his loader Volkov had stopped talking. That was how Serenko knew the danger was close. Volkov was the kind of soldier who filled silence with words, jokes, complaints, anything to keep fear away. But now there was nothing, only the sound of tracks, only the approaching engine, only the question every soldier eventually faces. What do you do when the enemy arrives and you know your weapon may not be enough? The ZIS looked almost fragile compared to the machine coming toward them. It was light, simple, and low to the ground. A weapon built for speed and numbers, not intimidation. The Panther was different. It was everything the German war machine wanted the world to believe it represented. Precision, power, technology. Its sloped frontal armor was designed to turn. Its long 75mm gun could destroy Soviet tanks at distances, where Soviet crews struggled even to fight back against the Panther's front armor. Serenko's gun was almost useless. The Germans knew this. They had seen Soviet anti-tank guns before. They had destroyed them before. They believed the battlefield ahead belonged to them. But they did not know what waited in the fields outside Kursk. They did not know that Serenko was not aiming where the Panther was. He was aiming where it would be. And that difference was about to change everything. The Battle of Kursk was not only a clash between armies, it was a contest between confidence and adaptation. Germany arrived in the summer of Fay believing it could restore the momentum it had lost after Stalingrad. Operation Citadel was designed to destroy the Soviet forces gathered around the Kursk salient and create the kind of breakthrough Germany had achieved earlier in the war. The plan depended heavily on armored power, and at the center of that plan was the Panther. German engineers had created a tank that looked like the future of armored warfare. Its armor was angled to increase protection without adding impossible weight. Its powerful gun could strike Soviet vehicles before they could respond effectively. It was faster than heavier German tanks and more heavily armed than many Allied designs. On paper, it was a nightmare. For Soviet commanders, the problem was simple. They did not have enough weapons capable of defeating it head-on. The standard Tife carried a 76mm gun that struggled against the Panther's frontal armor. The Su tank destroyer was arriving, but not in enough numbers. Heavy vehicles capable of stopping Panthers existed, but they were too limited to protect hundreds of kilometers of battlefield. The Soviets faced an uncomfortable reality. They could not create enough stronger weapons before the German attack arrived, so they needed another answer. Not more power. A smarter use of what they already had. That answer came from an artillery instructor named Pyotr Vasilyev. He was not a famous commander. He was not a battlefield celebrity. He was a man who spent his days studying numbers, angles, distances, armor thickness. The invisible mathematics behind Vasilyev had already experienced the brutality of the Eastern Front. He had fought near Moscow and lost 3 fingers from a German mortar explosion. But instead of allowing that wound to define him, he turned his attention toward understanding the enemy. He studied captured German documents. He examined armor tests. He analyzed every detail of how steel met steel. And he discovered something important. The Panther was almost impossible to kill from the front. Almost because war was never only about the weapon. It was about the relationship between the weapon and the moment. The Panther's greatest strength was its frontal armor, but its sides were different. The side armor was much thinner. A ZIS firing the correct armor, piercing round could penetrate it at the right distance. The problem was getting that opportunity. German tank tactics protected their weaknesses. Panthers moved in formations designed to cover each other's sides. Soviet crews who tried to attack directly would be destroyed before they could fire enough shots. So Vasilyev, he stopped thinking like a man trying to defeat a tank. He started thinking like a man trying to create a mistake. His solution was based on geometry. The ZIS crews would not face the Panthers directly. They would position their guns at carefully calculated angles, creating a situation where a tank that appeared to be approaching head-on would actually expose its weaker side armor. The German commander would see no immediate threat. The Soviet gun would not appear dangerous. Then, at the exact moment, at the exact distance, the shell would arrive where the armor was weakest. The tactic required something technology could not provide. Discipline. A soldier had to watch a Panther approach and refuse to fire. Every instinct screamed to shoot. Every second increased the danger. At 300 meters, the enemy filled the entire world. The tank's gun could turn toward them. The crew inside could destroy them. But if they fired too early, the shell would strike the Panther's strongest protection. The shot would fail. The position would be revealed, and the next shot would belong to the Germans. Vasiliev trained crews to wait, to trust the calculation, to trust the angle. By the time Operation Citadel began on July 5, Soviet defenses around Kursk had been transformed into a carefully prepared trap minefields, artillery positions, anti-tank strong points, and hidden ZIS guns placed not randomly, but according to the terrain and the expected movement of German armor. The guns were buried into the earth. The crews waited in silence. They knew the Panthers were coming. They knew what those machines could do. And they knew that if their calculations were wrong, there would be no second chance. When the German offensive began, the battlefield quickly became something neither side expected. The Panthers advanced believing their armor would carry them through, but Soviet guns were waiting in places that seemed impossible. German crews began reporting strange losses. A Panther would move forward, then suddenly it would stop. Smoke would rise. The crew inside would be gone. And the Soviet gun that had destroyed it seemed to have fired from an angle that should not have worked. At first, German commanders believed the Soviets had introduced a new weapon, something heavier, something more powerful. They searched for the explanation, but the truth was more frustrating. The weapon killing their newest tank was not new. It was the same ZIS they had underestimated for years. The difference was the person behind it. The difference was understanding. German tank crews began experiencing a new kind of fear. Not fear of the enemy directly in front of them. Fear of the unseen. Every open field became suspicious. Every possible angle became dangerous. Commanders began rotating their turrets constantly, searching for hidden anti-tank positions. That reaction slowed their movements. It disrupted their formations, and it created exactly the uncertainty Vasiliev had predicted. The tactic did not defeat the Panther by overpowering it. It defeated the Panther by changing the battlefield around it. A weapon built to dominate straight lines suddenly faced a battlefield where straight lines no longer existed. For Sarenko and thousands of other Soviet gunners, the moment of truth came one Panther at a time. The training was simple. The reality was terrifying. The enemy appeared. The range closed. The machine grew larger. The instinct to survive became almost impossible to control. But they waited. Because courage in war is rarely it is the ability to act while fear is telling you to run. Sarenko watched the Panther approach. The tank became larger through the gun sight, the steel body, the moving tracks, the dark shape of the turret. Inside that machine were men who believed they were protected. They were not villains. They were soldiers who trusted their equipment. They believed the Panther gave them an advantage. And under normal circumstances, it did. But they were facing a different kind of opponent. An opponent who had studied their machine. An opponent who understood its weakness. An opponent who was willing to wait 290 meters. The moment arrived, Sarenko fired. The ZIS exploded backward with a violent recoil. The sound disappeared into the larger chaos of Kursk. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then the shell struck, not the front, not the armor designed to stop it. The side, the vulnerable point, the Panther that seemed unstoppable, suddenly became still. A machine built to dominate the battlefield was reduced to smoke and fire beside Sarenko. Volkov began loading another round. 6, no celebration, no speech, no dramatic victory. Just the next shell because another tank would come. That was the reality of Kursk. Survival was measured in seconds. The battle around Kursk became one of the largest armored confrontations in history. The Germans brought some of their most advanced vehicles. The Soviets answered not only with weapons, but with preparation, mathematics, and human endurance. The Panther remained an impressive tank. Its defeat at Kursk did not mean it was poorly designed. After the war, military experts continued studying it. Its armor layout and gun influenced future tank development. In a pure technical comparison, it was one of the most advanced medium tanks of its era. But technology alone does not win battles, because every weapon exists inside a system. A tank needs fuel, a gun needs ammunition, an army needs logistics, and behind every machine is a human being making decisions under pressure. The Panther was designed around the belief that superior engineering could overcome resistance. The Soviet defense around Kursk was designed around a different idea that knowledge could turn weakness into strength. The ZIS, but in the hands of a trained crew, placed at the correct angle, at the correct distance, it became something the Germans did not expect. A threat, the story of Kursk, was not simply about a tank being destroyed. It was about a moment when confidence collided with preparation. The German army arrived with a weapon that seemed unbeatable. The Soviet defenders answered with patience, with calculation, with men willing to hold their fire while 54 tons of steel moved closer and closer. Years later, a ZIS field gun would sit preserved in a museum. Visitors would walk past it. They would see a simple artillery piece, old metal, quiet machinery. Nothing compared to the legendary tanks it once faced. But the gun carries a hidden story, because it is positioned at an angle. Not straightforward, not the way most people expect. The angle is the memory, the reminder that on one summer battlefield in Fay victory did not belong only to the strongest machine. It belonged to the people who understood what that machine could not see. And somewhere inside the smoke of Kursk, a 22-year-old gunner who believed he was about to die pulled a trigger and proved that sometimes the smallest advantage is enough. Not more armor, not more power, just the right angle at the right moment. But the story of the Z did not end on the battlefield, because the most important battles are not always decided when the first shot is fired. They are decided years before in workshops, training grounds, and quiet rooms where someone studies a problem everyone else believes has no solution. Pyotr Vasilyev never became a legendary battlefield commander. He never stood in front of cheering crowds. His victory was different. It existed in the decisions made by thousands of anonymous soldiers who survived, because someone had taken the time to understand the enemy. That was the hidden lesson of Kursk. The Germans had built a machine designed to break through Soviet defenses. The Soviets built a defense designed to break German expectations. And those two ideas collided in the fields outside Kursk. For the men inside the Panthers, the battlefield changed in a way they never expected. They had trained to fear anti-tank guns in front of them. They had studied enemy weapons. They understood distance, armor, firepower. But they had not prepared for an enemy who would refuse to fight the way they expected. The most dangerous weapon on the battlefield was not always the one with the biggest explosion. Sometimes it was an idea, a different way of seeing the same battlefield for Serenko. There was no time to think about history, no time to understand the importance of what he was doing. He was 22 years old, he was cold, exhausted, terrified, like every other soldier around him. He wanted to survive the day. The difference was that when the moment arrived, he trusted his training more than his fear. The Panther had everything that suggested victory: more armor, more power, more technology. But inside the Soviet gun pit was something the German engineers could not measure. Exactly when a smaller weapon could defeat a larger one. The battle continued. More Panthers attacked. More Soviet guns fired. Some calculations worked, some failed. Some crews never got a second shot. That was the reality hidden behind every battlefield statistic. Every destroyed tank represented people. Men sitting inside machines, men loading shells with shaking hands. Men hearing explosions outside their armor and wondering if the next one would be theirs. The Panther crews were not defeated because they were weak. They were defeated because they met an opponent who had solved the problem before the battle began. And that may be the most important lesson of Kursk. War is often remembered as a competition of strength. The larger army, the better weapon, the stronger economy. But history repeatedly shows something more complicated. The side that wins is often the side that understands the problem. First, the Germans asked, how do we build a tank that cannot be stopped? The Soviets asked, how do we stop a tank we cannot defeat? Those are different questions. And different questions create different answers. The Panther represented engineering confidence. The ZIS represented adaptation. One was built to dominate the battlefield. The other was used by people who understood how to survive on it. After the war, Serenko disappeared into the millions of ordinary soldiers who had fought across the Eastern Front. There was no monument dedicated only to him, no famous photograph showing the exact moment he changed history. That is often what happens to the people who make history. The world remembers the machines, the generals, the battles, but not always the young man sitting behind a small gun, waiting as an enemy tank approaches. A young man who knows one mistake means death. A young man who feels fear but does not allow fear to decide. A young man who pulls the trigger at exactly the right moment. Today, the Panther remains in museums as a symbol of German engineering. The ZIS remains as a symbol of Soviet artillery. But between those two machines was something more important. A decision, a calculation, a human being choosing to trust knowledge over panic. The battlefield eventually became quiet. The smoke disappeared. The wheat fields grew back. The tanks stopped moving. But the angle remained. A small adjustment in direction. A few degrees that separated failure from survival. And somewhere in that difference was the reason a 22-year-old soldier who thought he was about to die became part of one of the most remarkable moments of the Battle of Kursk.